Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. It's August 19th, 2020, and I'm your host, Mike Gurecki, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's front line. As regular listeners to the Mongabay Newscast know, we often feature bioacoustic recordings on this podcast. Bioacoustics is a growing field of research around the globe. On our last episode, Mongabay founder and CEO Rhett Butler and I discussed how bioacoustics could help us to evaluate the effectiveness of conservation interventions, one area of research that is not nearly as robust as it probably should be. Bioacoustics are already being used to study animal behavior and monitor wildlife populations and whole ecosystems. One of the most fascinating things about bioacoustics, however, is that it is letting us peer into worlds we never could have otherwise looked into, such as the world beneath the ocean's surface. So today we're taking a look at two examples of how bioacoustics have allowed us to discover things we never knew before about marine life. Both examples are for species found in the waters around southern Africa. Dr. Tess Gridley joins us to talk about the recent discovery of singing humpback whales in South Africa's False Bay. Dr. Gridley is affiliated with the University of Cape Town and the University of Stellenbosch, both in South Africa, and is the director of the NGO's Sea Search and the Namibian Dolphin Project. She's also the founder of the African Bioacoustics Community. Gridley plays us some of the recordings she and her team made documenting humpback songs in False Bay for the first time ever, and discusses the African Bioacoustic Community's upcoming conference, which she hopes will help inspire even more bioacoustic research focused on African wildlife. We're also joined by Sasha Dines, a PhD student at the University of Stellenbosch who is studying humpback dolphins. That's right, we've got a tale of two humpbacks for you today, folks. Dines' work is focused on determining whether or not Indian Ocean humpback dolphins make signature whistle calls, which could be used to monitor the dolphins via passive acoustic monitoring arrays. She'll play us some signature whistles of a humpback dolphin named Hermie and explain how bioacoustic monitoring could help improve not just monitoring but also conservation efforts for these endangered dolphins. Humpback whales are, of course, well known for producing their haunting and mysterious songs. It's the male humpbacks that sing the complex songs the species is known for, which, combined with the fact that they typically sing at breeding sites, has led scientists to assume that the songs play a role in mating. But humpbacks have been documented singing along migration routes as well, including along the west coast of South Africa. Tess Gridley co-authored a study published in the journal Bioacoustics back in January that used over 7,200 hours of recordings made off the coast of South Africa's Western Cape province to monitor the occurrence of humpback whale songs.
You know, a bit of a broader context. So I've been working here for about 12 years or so in Namibia and also in South Africa. And in that time, mostly working on dolphin species. So a lot of work on signature whistles, which are like individually distinctive names in dolphins. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because we didn't focus a lot at that time on things like humpback whale song because there was a wide belief that humpback whales weren't singing in the waters around South Africa and Namibia. So although these areas are areas where you get a lot of animals migrating through and a very clear migration pattern up to breeding grounds on the west coast of Africa and then also across the east coast in places like Madagascar and Mozambique. It isn't an area that has traditionally been thought of where animals were singing a lot. It's a migration area. And instead, there had been a lot of behavioral work done in those breeding ground areas on the humpback whale song and also calls, mother and calf calls and things like that produced by animals at the breeding grounds. So it was only about 5 years ago or so when we started to get the first recordings of animals, and this was in supergroups. So we have this very unusual phenomenon here that's been observed for the last, since 2011 or so, where we're getting large groups of animals feeding. So we always knew that the area around the west coast of South Africa was a very good area for productivity, and we've thought that the animals might be suspending their southward migration and feeding off the west coast of South Africa. But in the last 10 years or so, those numbers of whales have been increasing. And instead of sort of loose aggregations of animals, what we're now seeing is quite densely formed groups called supergroups, up to 200 or more animals in groups feeding. And when they're feeding, they're obviously very vocally active. So they are making a lot of non-song calls. So a lot of these contact calls, these whoops and grumbles and high-frequency screeches and things like that. And within the context of recording these supergroups, we actually picked up the first animal singing. And so that was quite unusual for us. And it sort of led to extending that research program and really looking further into humpback whale song around the coast of South Africa, and particularly around the area in the Western Cape.
In their study, Gridley and team say that they identified humpback songs in about 211 hours of the recordings they made. They write that these findings indicate prevalent, albeit seasonal, song production by humpback whales off the coast of South Africa.
Absolutely, and in fact, we're finding more and more. So really at the sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of what we have found so far and what there still is to find out. So we are very much in the sort of first stages of this work. So, finding out, okay, well, animals are singing here, that's interesting, but it obviously leads to a lot more questions about how many animals are singing and the reasons why they might be still singing. But also there's a lot of other things going on. So we're finding that humpback whales aren't really abiding by the sort of rule book of what they should be doing. So we're seeing animals here pretty much year round in around South African waters. And then we're also, as I said, having these big groups that are feeding mostly between November and March time around the areas of Cape Town. And then also last year or so, we had juvenile animals, so yearlings or so, feeding in the really nearshore waters around the Cape Town Peninsula area. And so all of these sort of new observations and new behaviours, or they feel like new behaviours, really just raise loads more questions about what the animals are doing here, and sort of raise more questions than they do answer. So we're just starting out really in terms of what we can find out about the overall behaviour and the presence of animals here, as well as the feeding behaviour, and then also the acoustic behaviour, which includes both the singing, which is done by males, but then also lots of other social sounds that are produced by both males and females.
For the study, the researchers had 4 hydrophones set up in South Africa's False Bay. But because humpback whale songs can travel such great distances through the water, Gridley and team really had no way of knowing where exactly the singing whales were. Just days before doing this interview, however, Gridley and colleagues were finally able to capture a humpback whale singing in False Bay.
We've been in lockdown like most of the world, and so a lot of our research, which we had planned for the last 5 months or so, had been put on hold. And so normally this time of year we would be in Namibia actually doing research there. And so only recently we've been able to get our boat back on the water here and to start doing surveys. And yeah, so the other day when we were at sea, we found a group of humpback whales which looked like they were in some sort of heat run. So with the what we think were males following a female, and actually that group split up. And as we were following part of the group, and what we do when we follow them, we're taking photo identification pictures to track individuals, and we're also monitoring their behaviour and things like that. And as we were following one group, we actually spotted 2 other animals, and so we approached those animals, and it was there that we actually just slowed the boat down, and then we could actually hear them singing in air. But the interesting thing from our perspective in that encounter was that the animals that were singing, well, it was one male and there was another animal with him, was that they were incredibly restful and actually quite inconspicuous. So they would take these very long dives, 10 minutes or so, and when they did pop up, just breathe for a couple of breaths and then back down again. So it would have been very easy to miss them, but we put the hydrophone down, the underwater microphone that we use, and straight away you could hear this male singing really, really loudly. We were pretty thrilled, I have to say, when we were on the boat listening to these singing whales. And we recorded them for about 2 hours, and the only reason we had to leave was because it was getting late. But yeah, to be able to confirm animals singing in the bay, that's brilliant. I mean, it's intrinsically just a beautiful sound to hear, but it also indicates something wider, which is that we are seeing increases in humpback whale numbers, and just really intriguing behaviours that they're exhibiting, both in terms of potentially breeding behaviours, but then also the feeding that we're seeing as well. So there's absolutely masses to learn in terms of what these guys are doing around South African waters.
All right, we're going to listen to the recordings Gridley and team made out on the boat in False Bay that day. In this first clip, you'll actually hear the moment the hydrophone is put down in the water, followed immediately by a humpback song. And here's another clip from that same day. Gridley explains.
In general, humpback whale song is made up of units, which is the smallest component of the song. The continuous notes are called units. And then the units are combined to form phrases. And then those phrases are repeated to form themes. And then those themes are actually then alternated to form these long songs. And so what I have sent you is short recordings of the song that we recorded just a few days ago, and males can sing continuously up till 8 hours. So they basically just singing over and over, and then in any one year the males will actually converge on the same song type. So that song type often regionally distinct, and then within an area, the males will sing the same song type, and then over the years that song type will gradually evolve and change slightly year on year. In some areas of the world, there's been what's called a cultural revolution in song. So basically a complete change in the song structure that the males sing from one year to the next. But as I explained, here in South Africa, we've got so much to learn. So we've definitely noticed differences from one year to the next in terms of the song structure. And we've definitely noticed that in the same year, animals are singing very similar, if not the same songs. But we still have so much to learn about how those songs are evolving in this area and how structured they are, which also might vary depending on the region. So the complexity of songs and how ordered they are may well be different for different geographical areas.
In September of last year, we featured here on the Mongabay Newscast the songs of humpbacks from 4 major breeding grounds around the world, where the whales appeared to be singing nearly identical songs, which challenges our view that humpbacks live in distinct groups that rarely overlap. We don't know exactly how the humpbacks came to all learn to sing the same song, as they move through vast areas of ocean during their annual migration from feeding grounds to breeding grounds. But passive acoustic monitoring, like Gridley and colleagues used in their study, could help us to learn more about potential population linkages as they travel through migration routes like the one off South Africa's west coast.
Yeah, so where we are in the west coast of South Africa, we're basically at this sort of intersect between 2 stocks which are migrating. So we've got the west coast stock, which is called breeding stock B, and then we've got the east coast stock, which is called breeding stock C, and then those stocks are further subdivided depending on where they actually breeding. And so because of that, we're at quite an interesting but confusing area geographically, because we may be having both animals from both stocks basically passing by our waters here around the Cape Town area. And we know from recent satellite tagged animals that in fact animals are moving between the east coast and also along to the west coast. And so it's a really interesting area to be working in. But it opens a lot of questions, and from a cultural perspective, it's also an area where we might be expecting to see some sort of cultural exchange between animals from those different stocks. So potential for song transmission and song learning around our areas, particularly where they're feeding.
Gridley and team documented humpback songs solely in the months of September and October, which would coincide with the whales' migration. But really, she says, if anything, the study ended up producing as many questions as it did answers about what the humpbacks are actually doing out there in South Africa's waters.
Yeah, it is consistent with that idea, and I wish I could give you a really clear answer, but I can't currently because it's kind of a mess in terms of what we're seeing. So yes, we absolutely see an increase in numbers of animals in September, October time, coincidental with the southward migration, and that makes sense. Some of those animals appear to travel into False Bay in a quite directional fashion. So traveling along the coast, and then they sort of hit the top of False Bay, and they may just then turn around and realise they've taken a wrong turn and then carry on further south. But then we're also getting, as I said, just after that, so from November onwards, the formation of these large supergroups of animals that are feeding, and that's a little bit further north. So it's possible we have animals coming through in different stages on that southward migration, some of them stopping and coming into False Bay, some of them stopping to feed. And we may also be getting animals from breeding stock C coming across on their southward migration that may be then going round the corner and then basically feeding just north of Cape Town. So we've got quite a dynamic system and quite a lot of confusion basically on what might be taking place in our areas. With the passive acoustic monitoring, so being able to put out these underwater microphones, we're able to listen in to the singing behaviour, but also to the sounds that they're making when they're feeding. And so that gives us a bit more information about when animals are there. But with the singing behaviour, most specifically, singing is restricted to the males. It's only the males that are singing. So that's information on those, but it doesn't provide a full picture of what all the animals are doing.
One of the questions raised by the study is why, on at least 15 occasions, were multiple humpbacks recorded singing over each other?
Well, it definitely means that there was 2 or more animals there. In terms of their behaviours, I mean, that comes down to the function of song, and there's still quite a lot of debate about that. So at the breeding grounds, that's the area where the males sing prolifically, and there's quite a lot of debate still in terms of the exact function of that song. So whether it functions to attract a female, there seems to be not as much evidence for that, although it seems like an obvious reason for singing, but it may also be to compete between males, and then also perhaps just something called a lecking mechanism. So basically animals are singing and that attracts females to that general area. So there's still quite a lot of debate in the literature concerning the exact function of song. And of course, when you're researching humpback whales, you're looking at really large areas of the ocean which the song is transmitting over. So it's actually quite difficult to accurately pinpoint the singing behavior and then also the responses to that song sometimes. So there's still quite a lot of unknown there. And then in terms of what the animals are doing when they're migrating and also into False Bay, it may be that the animals, the males in particular, are still singing to try and breed with females, and maybe it's some sort of extension of the breeding behavior. It could also be due to elevated testosterone levels in the males, which haven't fallen after the breeding season. Also, it may be juvenile males who are singing in the bay and actually haven't been migrating. So we're still lots of questions there about why they're singing and what that actually means.
So what are the implications of the findings of the study and of finding humpbacks singing in False Bay for the first time?
Yeah, so in general, the number of humpback whales that we've got in our waters in general is increasing. So we're seeing about a 7% year-on-year increase in humpback whales. And so what we might be seeing is a return to areas where they used to frequent before numbers were really affected by commercial whaling. So being able to use acoustic tools to monitor them means that we've got a really good idea about when animals are in our waters, and also some indication of the number of animals, and then also, what they're doing. So being able to document these behaviors using acoustic monitoring has a lot more information there for conservation as well. So in the paper that we're discussing here, we were able to look at the relative loudness of the sounds and get a feeling for where animals were when they were singing. But we also got information about the time of year that they were there, and then also even the time of day that they were singing, which has information about what the animals are actually up to in the bay when we're recording them. So acoustic monitoring is a really nice way to get a bit of an insight into both information that's useful for conservation, but then also information that's intriguing and useful for behavioral work as well.
So bioacoustics are really affording us an opportunity to look into the lives of animals in places we never could have observed them in before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being able to get a better feeling for these charismatic but also quite difficult to observe species is definitely one advantage to using acoustic monitoring. And that transcends not just for underwater monitoring, say in the marine environment, but also for monitoring species of birds and animals that are really hard to see. So in forest habitats, or animals that maybe are nocturnal and things like that. So being able to use acoustics is a really important tool, particularly for these sort of cryptic animals, which you might not be able to observe, but you can definitely hear.
Bioacoustics is a relatively new but growing field, and there's plenty of opportunity for growth across Africa, Gridley says.
Absolutely. I mean, there's room for growth. So in terms of acoustic monitoring in general, there's been real development in the last 10 years. So technology is getting a lot cheaper. So there are now small recorders that you can put out for weeks at a time that cost just $50 US. So that opens up a whole range of opportunities to record birds and bats and frogs and things like that. There's also new statistical methods to estimate biodiversity using acoustic indices. There's machine learning to be able to process large data sets much more efficiently and quickly. And there's better data storage as well. So we can basically put recorders out for weeks or months at a time. So there's lots of opportunity to do this kind of work now that maybe wasn't available maybe 20 years ago. And each year that equipment is getting a bit more affordable, and people are sort of picking up on that. So there's definitely room for growth. Having said that, there has been work going on in Africa for many, many years. So we're undertaking a review currently of the bioacoustics research that's been undertaken in Africa. And around 700 publications have been found.
Gridley founded the African Bioacoustics Community in March 2018 to provide a networking forum for scientists working in all aspects of bioacoustic research on the continent. And the community will be hosting its second conference later this year.
We really want to get more student involvement. We really want to get people talking and sharing ideas and sharing new methods. When we put the first sort of call out for the first conference in 2018, it was brilliant to sort of have a really good feedback from those people who are actually maybe working in different pockets in different areas of predominantly South Africa, but also other areas on the African continent, to provide a platform where they could come together.
This year's conference will be impacted by the ongoing COVID pandemic, of course, but it's still scheduled to go ahead in early November.
Obviously, everything got put on a back burner until we could work out what might be possible and to sort of scope out how online conferencing might work. And there's positives and negatives. I mean, I really do value the fact that a lot of people have really welcomed this conference online. And so we've got a really great lineup of people already who are giving talks and giving plenaries, and also 2 special sessions, one on the basics of bioacoustics, which we're really hoping will attract people who may have no bioacoustics background but just think it's an interesting area and want to learn more. And then also a special session on the hearing of harms, which will focus on using acoustic monitoring to find out more information about crimes or logging and things like that. So those special sessions, I think, are going to be very well attended, and there'll be a lot of interest in those. But having in-person attendance as well is obviously really, really great if we can do it. So we're keeping our door open for a hybrid conference currently. South Africa's just gone down to level 2. So if we can provide an area where those people working on the continent can still get to Stellenbosch and attend safely, then we'll do so. But we're going to make a final call on that at the end of September.
One talk attendees of the conference might get to see is from Sasha Dines, a PhD candidate at Stellenbosch University who's working with Dr. Gridley. Their current project is focused on determining whether or not it's possible to use bioacoustics to monitor individual Indian Ocean humpback dolphins. What Dines plans to present at the conference is evidence for the use of signature whistles by the dolphins. Dines says that signature whistles, which are individually distinctive whistle types, have long been documented as part of the vocal repertoire of bottlenose dolphins.
A lot of research is out there on signature whistle use, the use of these individual whistles that are distinctive to the each individual dolphin. They kind of get them, or they form them as a calf, and then there's quite a bit of research that shows that they're stable throughout their life, which is fascinating. But in Indian Ocean humpback dolphins, or just the Sousa genus as a whole, there hasn't been much research done and kind of confirmation that there's signature whistle use in this species. So the first part of my PhD and some of our collaborators we're working towards actually proving that there is stable signature whistle use in this species. And then we're actually trying to take it one step further. So we're trying to actually use those signature whistles, or those individual like labels or tags, I suppose, or as tags, and monitor them around the coastline of South Africa. So if we can follow or detect each individual dolphin based on its individual whistle, we don't have to be on the boat, we don't have to be on the water. We can actually deploy underwater recording units all along the coastline, detect individuals as they move past, and then that can translate into monitoring this species, and that has implications on conservation. So we're trying to take it one step further than just kind of identifying signature whistles in the species. We're actually trying to use it to inform monitoring and conservation actions, which is, really exciting.
The goal is to someday deploy an array of moored hydrophones to monitor the dolphins.
So that's the aim. We haven't got them out there yet. So I'm still in the first set of bit of data collection. And I've been working a lot in Mozambique to collect some data and in-water data to confirm signature whistle use and general vocal repertoire, because we don't actually have a lot of information on not just signature whistle use in the species, but just generally what the sounds are that they're making. So the first part of my PhD has been just collecting a lot of acoustic data in different study locations around Southern Africa. And then the next step later this year or early next year is to deploy hydrophones, underwater recording units all along the coastline. And that's, so we're going to start in the Western Cape and then extrapolate that, and in phase 2 and phase 3, hopefully roll out some more equipment along the coastline.
Right now, Dines is essentially collecting data by hand, going out in a boat and dropping a hydrophone in the water when she sees humpback dolphins swimming around.
Yes, so that's what we've been doing in South Africa. And I've spent some time up in Richards Bay and then around the kind of the southern Cape Coast. And yeah, exactly that. So we go out on the boat, we go and find humpback dolphins, approach when safe to do so, take photo ID data, behavioural data, and put the hydrophone in the water as well. So, one of the major things that's quite important with this type of data is to make sure that it's single species recording. So obviously, if we're trying to describe the sounds that this species is making, we don't want any other species in the area to be detected. So we have to make sure that we only have humpback dolphins in the area, or to the best of our knowledge. And then also some really good behavioural data notes and photo ID data as well, because that can also feed into the behaviours and the vocalisations that they're making. So that's in South Africa. And then we were lucky enough to go to Mozambique earlier this year. And there we were working with some research centres and actually collecting in-water acoustic recordings. And that was amazing, because actually to be in the water, filming and recording these dolphins underwater, we could see, we were like 80% of what we were seeing at the surface, we were now able to record underwater behavioural notes and things like that from the videos. So that was really, really cool as well. Essentially, we're trying to build up a repertoire of sounds that these dolphins are making. And so we're building up different, to help us inform us what sounds that they're making in their repertoire, and the form and the function of these sounds. We need a lot of behavioural data, as much data as we can collect alongside just the acoustic recordings. And when we were in Mozambique, a lot of the stuff that we were seeing was a lot of social behaviours, which was really, really cool, because we could specifically see when individuals were moving towards each other or moving away from each other. So the contact calls, which is something that the signature whistles are emitted when they're approaching a group or when they're leaving a group, because they are typically a contact call to allow the group to kind of individually identify who's coming and who's leaving. That was much easier to identify when we were in the water. And we were filming them coming and going, which was really cool.
So we've got a recording of a dolphin named Hermie to listen to. He's one of the humpback dolphins you encountered in the waters off Mozambique?
Yes, so Hermie was an individual that we encountered in Mozambique. We're working in Ponta de Ouro in southern Mozambique with a group called Dolphin Encounters Research Centre. And they have a large group of resident bottlenose dolphins and also a few Indian Ocean humpback dolphins that are they have mixed species groups up there. And there's this one humpback dolphin called Hermie that they encounter more often than the others. And we were lucky enough that while we were up there, we had a couple of encounters with Hermie, and he was incredibly sociable. He was around us. When he was there, he was very much a part of the group, circling us in the water. And so these are a couple of clips that I pulled out from our GoPro footage that actually you can see Hermie in the footage like whistling. So he's doing some bubble emissions out of his blowhole, and the high-pitched whistling that you can hear, that's the Humpback Dolphin Hermie.
All right, let's give Hermie a listen. Indian Ocean humpback dolphins like Hermie are actually South Africa's most endangered marine mammal, Dines says.
Yeah, no, it is. It's classified as endangered on the IUCN Red List globally. And then in South Africa as well, the local assessment on the IUCN Red List is also endangered. And so if you're looking at cetaceans within South Africa, resident marine mammals, yeah, they're classed as the most endangered. And so therefore the most threatened. So work like this and finding out ways in which we can better conserve them and monitor them is really important, because they're very much at risk from a lot of threats around the coastline.
What are some of those threats?
Yeah, so they're incredibly coastal species. They are inshore, they're coastal, they really like to hang out in the surf zone. They are found not much deeper than 25 meters water depth. And so that makes them exposed to a lot of threats that you find around the coastline, such as development, harbour expansion, recreational vessels, pollution. There's a lot of kind of things that they're threatened with. And also, that also comes into play when we're trying to collect data on them. So a lot of the cetacean work is actually on the boat, doing boat-based visual surveys. And so when we're on the boat, we're actually, trying to find these animals, and they're in the surf a lot of the time or very coastal, and that makes it dangerous for us to collect data. So it's dangerous for the animals and it's dangerous for us as well. So if there's a method of us able to monitor these animals, this species, without having to be on the water or put any human lives in danger, it's a huge plus point for us. There's also shark nets in KZN up the coast. We have shark nets, which is bather safety nets, and they have a high bycatch rate of Indian Ocean humpback dolphins up there, and that's actually been classed as one of the major declines in the species, in the population in South Africa, is bycatch in these shark nets. They have successfully removed one of the nets that was causing a lot of the bycatch, a majority of the bycatch, through positive campaigning up there. But yeah, other than that, though, that is one of the major risks and threats as well to the species in South Africa.
So bioacoustics are not only helping us to learn things about humpback dolphins that we never knew before, but they could also help us to conserve the species better, you say?
The presentation that I'm going to hopefully give at the conference is all about kind of a proof of concept, really. So what we're doing is we're showing that through the data we've collected so far that it's strong evidence for signature whistle use in this species. So we've got long-term stability and recaptures of over space and time of signature whistles corroborated by photo ID data. So that's kind of what I'm presenting at the conference. And then hopefully going on from that is then you collecting a database or a catalogue per se of signature whistles around the coastline of the population, and then using PAM to actually then monitor them through passive acoustic monitoring. How can that be then used to inform conservation actions? So one of the main outputs from my PhD is looking at movement data. So how far individuals are moving and the rate of movement. Then also sociality and things like density. So asking what are the social behaviours of this species and how are the groups formed and group structure in the species in South Africa. And so by knowing a little bit more about how the population in South Africa is formed, I think we can actually then start to identify key areas that we need to maybe protect more, and bring in policy and work with those sorts of side of things to actually conserve those areas where there is a high density of animals.
If you enjoy the Mongabay Newscast, we ask that you please consider becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. We are a nonprofit news outlet, so just $1 or more per month would really help us offset production costs and hosting fees. Supporters at the $10 a month level also get access to our members-only insider content. So if you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Front Line, please head to patreon.com/Mongabay to learn more and support the Mongabay Newscast. That's patreon.com/Mongabay. And don't forget you can subscribe to the Mongabay Newscast on Android, the Google Podcasts app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, RSS, CastBox, Pocket Casts, via Pandora or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Or you can download our new app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either app store for the Mongabay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all our previous episodes as well. And of course, you can read all of our news and inspiration from Nature's Front Line at mongabay.com. Or if you prefer to keep up with us on social media, follow us at facebook.com/Mongabay or on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @Mongabay on both of those platforms. Thanks as always for listening to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your host, Mike Gorecki, signing off. Talk to you again in 2 weeks.